Okay, well, welcome everybody, both live and on the recording. Let's make a start. I was going to talk for about 10, 15 minutes on this um, very big topic, actually. And it's become quite an industry now, the kind of whole wellness and mental health at work. As more and more organizations realize that they do have a duty of care to their employees. To be honest, it's taken quite a while to get there. We kind of big circle from when people valued their employees to when they saw them as almost a resource to be used. So people are beginning to get the idea now that actually this is a big issue, and you can't just work people to the bone all hours of the day. But to be honest, there's a lot of organizations still who are offering really what can only amount to palliative care, giving people yoga and stress balls, as opposed to, really focusing on the fundamental issues and the root cause of the issues. Anyway, I did a little poll, which hopefully some of you voted on. Not obviously a conclusive poll and not statistically particularly valid. But the point is, I think it gives quite a good indication of what people think, because I asked whether it was the individual's fault, burnout, whether it was the company who should be doing more, or whether the issue is obviously a lot more complex than that. And consistently throughout the kind of time the poll was on, it was around 30 to 40% who were saying that the companies can do more. They can do a lot more to address the issue and help employees through work so they don't have burnout. And 60%, 65 to 70%, all the time, said that actually it's a much more complex issue than this. If clearly there are more inputs, more issues, and more variables that create an environment of burnout. And therefore, rather than going for a binary, his fault, their fault, it's more complex. And I think we all probably agree with that. It is a complex issue. And the root causes of why some people become burnt out are clearly complex. But what I found really fascinating, really, really fascinating, is that nobody said in the voting that it was the fault of the individual. In other words, they brought burnout upon themselves. And I found that particularly interesting because I had serious burnout, and that's not my experience. My experience is that I, at the time, entirely blamed myself. I kind of crashed and burned by my own volition, in a sense. I drove into that wall. I don't remember particularly being forced to do that. Obviously, my kind of thinking is slightly different now from a distance, but at the time, no, no, no. I felt that I had burnt myself out as opposed to have been burnt out. So it's probably worth just recapping on my story to kind of give you a sense of what that actually means. So from an early age, I've always been a driven person, restless, not ambitious in that sense. I've never really felt I needed to prove anything, but I've always been driven to do stuff, and a restless curiosity. I've had high levels of energy, both physical and creative. I'm always doing stuff, always thinking, always on. And aligned to that was an extraordinary sense of duty. From an early age, I've always felt that I should help other people. I wanted to set an example. I wanted to do my best, and I always wanted to work for other people and other things, society generally, and organizations. And I had a very, very high level of service mentality, doing things well and doing it well. And at the other side, on the other hand, um, I did, I have to admit, have a sense of status. I quite enjoyed being seen to be at the top, doing the big work. I enjoyed the dynamism that came from working on big issues, complex issues, difficult issues, high profile issues in the center of the storm. I really, really enjoyed that. I loved the kind of dynamism of being around and having to advise and make people do things. The whole thing I found hugely exciting. And I felt at the time that I was drawn to pressure in the same way that kind of moths are drawn to light bulbs. It was kind of me, and I was at the center of it. And I loved it. I, 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 um, I loved really hard, always on work. I don't remember thinking, oh, I don't want to do this. I really, really enjoyed it. But what happened is that over time, all the other things that made me who I am kind of got squeezed out. So I've always been pretty fit. So, doing exercise and playing sport was a hugely important part of my life, and just didn't have time for that. I read a lot of books. As you can see, this room is covered in books all the way around, and it's one of a number of rooms in the house covered literally in books. I love reading, but for a period of my life, just didn't have time for any of that, squeezed out. Other things, music. I do a lot of creative music making and singing, and didn't have time for that. What I part of it's partly defines who I am, this kind of thing, but no, didn't have time for that. And pro bono, I've been working advising charities. I've been on boards of various charity organizations. Nope, didn't have time for that either. So all the things which made me who I really was were kind of just being pushed to one side, including I hate to say family. For a few years of my life, I mean, I was going to work when the girls were in bed, asleep, children were asleep, and I got home when they were in sleep. They could have been at boarding school for all I knew. I was working Saturday and Sunday. I was a shit to live with. I was kind of, family thing happening over there, and I was over there. That was just the way it was. That was the reality of my working life. And I remember one occasion towards the end. I remember going to go to a hairdresser at about, I don't know, 5:30, 6 o'clock during the week. I just nipped out of my haircut. And this person said to me, so you finished for the day? I said, no. I said, it's 5:30. I mean, come on. I mean, another couple of hours to go. And they said, oh, do you start late? I said, no, start about 7:30. Oh, every day? I said, yeah, every day. Like, God, you must really love your job. And I remember that kind of just little worm going into the mind and staying there as I kind of thought about this, but dismissed it because actually, here's the other thing: I was very good at acting. People didn't notice that I was particularly stressed or particularly whatever. I was very good at kind of giving the impression that I was dynamically enjoying and doing this really, really well. But the reality was I was living off catch-up sleep. I was eating junk food. I was perennially tired. I was dipping into my energy levels. I used to get to the station in the evening. And frequent, I kind of get a Mars bar to give me the energy to get home. I could look at the notice board at Waterloo Station trying to pick my train. I kind of could hardly see it. I was so tired. And that was kind of, that was the work. Oh, and by the way, I'd be working on the train, of course, because that's what you did. And then catching up on a few more emails and stuff like at home. It's crazy. And there weren't any particular signs. And then I kind of kept getting kind of flu symptoms, which never go away. But what flu is like. We just work through it and all that kind of nonsense. And then it's a bit like when Hemingway was asked how did he go bankrupt, and he said, "Oh, the two ways." He said, first gradually, and then suddenly. And that's kind of happened to me. Eventually, I just ran into a wall. I mean, there's nothing left in the tank. It was simply nothing left, and could hardly move. I was just didn't know what happened, and I was absolutely exhausted. I couldn't do anything. And my first thoughts were that I'd failed, that I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't a proper leader. I was setting a bad example. It's letting people down. How could they possibly manage without me? All that kind of stuff. But the reality was I was off for 10 weeks. I just couldn't do anything. And then I went to a business course to the US for 6 weeks after that. So it's actually in total, it's a long time off. And the company were very worried. I mean, obviously they pushed me to this They had pushed me. I had been pushed to this brink by kind of doing what I was doing, and they were worried, and they gave me some brilliant care. They sent me to the best doctors who said there's nothing physically wrong with him. He's just knackered. They sent me to all the best mind doctors who said, no, there's nothing wrong with him. He's perfectly normal. He's just knackered. Um, and it was again, but it kept coming back to me. There's nothing wrong with me. Therefore, it's my fault that I got this wrong. Um, but we did have a brilliant chief medical officer at the company who, in a previous life, had been a CMO for a branch of the government which had dealt with, special forces and that kind of stuff. And he made me realize that even the very best elite soldiers get stress, and they can't be in the same theater all the time. You rotate troops, you put them in, they do the job, you take them out, and you replace them. You can't just be in such a line of fire, physically and metaphorically, constantly. The body can't take it. So it took me a long while to learn that lesson, that actually I wasn't superhuman, and nobody is superhuman, and even people who think they're superhuman, like me, will break unless they have regular ways of managing their workload and their attitude and their relationship with it. So it took me a long time to pack all this together, to be honest. And we're talking years, not weeks and months. It's a significant change in my life, and look, two things came out of it. Firstly, I think it led to eventually me becoming a coach, helping people get their balance in their life, the balance of what I call it, a three-piece life between paid work, unpaid work like pro bono, and enjoying simple pleasures. It's the combinations, the ratios are different, but the combination of all those things which make us who we really are. That's where our humanity comes from, because nobody, present company included, goes to their grave with their epitaph saying, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. What actually makes us who we are is a much more fundamental than that. And the second thing, which is at the back of my mind, is that the whole corporate culture that HR and other parts of the business promote needs to be rethought, because I had been indoctrinated really by the kind of always giving 110%. I've been indoctrinated by going the extra mile, and that leaders don't quit, and you lead by example, and all this kind of stuff, which in a sense, the people who seem to be promoted and rewarded most were the ones who were kind of working nonstop, working really hard. And that kind of mentality, the way that recruitment consultants were talking, the way that HR people were talking, the way the business talked, the language of overwork, the expectation for delivering over and above your contracted hours, all that seems to me has to be rethought as well, because I think it's going to getting in the way of how people live and how people work, especially when it's hybrid, and we're having to kind of combine different ways of working. In fact, when I wrote a book, I think that one there, leading from home, at the beginning of the pandemic, at the beginning of the lockdown. The reason it's called leading from home was that I realized that in order to lead people remotely, you first must lead yourself. You've got to learn how to set an example, how to be able to lead yourself in all types of way. But that's a slightly different. So I there's kind of 10 points. I'm going to try and share a screen if I can. There are like 10 points that I'd like to kind of share with you. And hopefully you could all see that. They're quite simple, and they're not meant to be hugely intellectual, but as a kind of contribution to the debate. The first thing, as I said, is that burnout can be self-inflicted. Despite what it says in my survey, or people said in the survey, I blame myself. I took it personally, and I was the one who was pushing myself, and the company hadn't done enough to pull back and say, what is going on here? Is he being supported? Is he doing too much? Does he need to delegate more? Does he need a bigger team? All that kind of stuff. I used to turn up at meetings and I remember CFOs and things saying, "Oh, it must be important because Tim's here." In other words, it was an important meeting, then Tim had to be there. The second thing, which I think I'd learned again through some clever people helping me, is that we're nothing really more than a bunch of chemicals and hormones running around in a little petri dish, and um, uh, under severe strain and pressure, the mind does play tricks on ourselves, and we lose the ability to self-regulate. So what I'd thought when I was younger was clearly, this that sort of behavior I was doing was abnormal. But when I was doing it myself under pressure, to me it seemed perfectly normal. I couldn't see that what I was doing was wrong. Which leads me to the next point, which is that pressure is good. There's no question about that. Working really, really, and I'm not against working hard, by the way. Don't get that impression. Pressure and working hard is really, really good, but we do need to be rotated. We can't just have our feet on the fire all the time. Fourthly, I think, as I said, corporate culture is hugely important because learned behavior is tend to what from our role models is how we get promoted. We see what other people are doing, and that's what we do. So if our bosses and our bosses are working nonstop and sending emails in the middle of the night and over the weekend, then we think we should be doing that as well. That becomes the kind of culture that's required in an organization. And added to the next point, the whole kind of nomenclature, the words and the language we use around this, a cult of hard work gets rewarded, giving 110%, going the extra mile, and I just think we've got to really think about that because it leads to serious burnout, and that's not good. Let me go to the next page. Here we go. And I think about all the technology that's coming. I mean, I had the first Blackberries back in 2000 or whatever, and since then I've always been on. And yet, despite all this fabulous technology, it's become an encumbrance to us and a burden rather than releasing us. So we've got to find a way of helping people work smarter and not harder. It sounds quite trite, but it's hugely important. We've got to find a way of making technology our friend and not our enemy. We've got to find a way of helping people understand that sometimes just sheer volume of stuff isn't helpful. And aside to that, is this kind of point I have about rethinking how we do our jobs. I learned a long time ago a lesson when I first became a senior manager, that you don't look at the person, you look at the role, you look at what it is that we're trying to achieve. And like many of you, I've lived through countless restructurings. And in restructurings, you tend to find that the person goes and the job remains. We look at positions and not roles. So what happens is that because the people have gone, we're still building the jobs upon legacy systems and legacy ways of behaving and legacy outcomes. Basically, with fewer people, the same amount of work gets shared out. So actually, there's all we're doing is putting more and more pressure on people, which comes to the next point, which I think is an axiom which is really important for all of us in life. Sometimes less is more. Actually, the more you give, the more you get. That kind of approach in life. Less genuinely is more. Doing things really well rather than just scattergun approach isn't helpful. And the last couple of points are lessons I learnt the hard way, which is getting the balance in life. What is it about you that really makes you who you are? And in my case, it genuinely is about reading books and doing good work in the community and elsewhere that I do pro bono, and enjoying simple pleasures. So paid work, unpaid work, and simple pleasures, and getting a balance of that. And some people might say, oh, well, are you Tim, are you encouraging organizations to reduce the hours that people work so they can spend more time doing other things? I say, yeah, why not? Because that way you'll get people who can really, it's a long-term investment in people rather than just using them as a kind of some sort of AI-driven robot machine. It's actually about people. The less they do, the more they can do other things. The more that they can do other things, the more they can bring to work. It's a kind of, it sounds like a paradox, but it's not. That's why I genuinely think that encouraging people to have a coach to help them through these difficult topics is a good thing rather than a bad thing. And the last thing I learned the hard way is that no one is indispensable. It's one of the key things we learn sometimes in business and in organizations, that we are where the buck stops. We are the person who's doing all this. Nobody can do it as well as us. Wow. The history of organizations and businesses and indeed governments is that everybody is indispensable. You know, when a CEO leaves a company, no one goes, oh my goodness, wait, well, can't find another one. Of course they can. You know, as politicians and prime ministers and presidents come and go, they're replaced. Everybody is indispensable. The world moves on, and sometimes we've just got to realize that our attitude and our relationship with work is about putting the whole organization and others as a team first, rather than thinking we have to do it all ourselves. So I'm looking at stop there, and oops, the daisy. I do hate trackbags. Why isn't it doing that? Anyway, I'm going to stop there and leave this topic for now. I might do another poll. Why does it stop? There we go. And I'm going to do another poll next week on another subject, and then bring in more people for more discussions. But if any of you have found this helpful and useful, do get in touch on my LinkedIn. You'll find a way of just booking a slot where we can have a proper chat. It may be you want help personally, it may be you want help in the organization, people in the organization who you think could benefit, or you might just want me to come and talk to your team. Either way, do get in touch and let's try and carry on the conversation, because as you probably heard, I find the whole idea of talking about burnout and preventing burnout hugely important, because you know, I'm here to tell the tale. Okay, thanks everybody, and bye for now.